It's a totally appropriate response, a fast, decisive response based on the scientific data that came out of really good contact tracing information was what was required. So basically, some really good detective work early on determined that we're facing although the numbers haven't increased much because they've done such a good job of encircling most of this, that it looks like there are some characteristics of this particular strain of COVID which are different, which is that it gets infective within a day of contact, which is probably 2 or 3 days earlier than what we've seen previously. That it stays asymptomatic for a fair bit and remains infectious despite that, and also the possibility that there may be an element that is more significant of that it's spread by contact on surfaces, because the initial infection appears that it came from probably a cleaner contacting something rather than through the air, and then that's why there's been very, very unusual recommendations in South Australia, which was that the pizza, anybody who even ordered a pizza from the pizza bar and received a pizza has been asked to quarantine for 14 days because of the concern that maybe they're going to catch it off the box, for example.
It's now day 1 of 6. How critical is this period for contact tracers, and do you have faith that they will be able to carry out their jobs so that this lockdown is not further extended?
Look, this buys them time to do it. So far, I was of the understanding, and we, from people who have been independent of this, felt that they'd really actually done a very good job. And I've got to say, with support from other states and the federal government, to try and get around this in terms of the contact tracing. What you're trying to do is find, with the detective work, to get in front of it in terms of the spread. And they've done actually quite a good job. But because of the rapidity of the spread and because of this unusual nature, there's still some concerns that maybe one gets out, maybe on a box, on a pizza box or something like that, or somebody else got infected in some other way that we don't know about. Because of that, that's why they've had to make the call. It buys us time in 2 ways. It, number one, gives those contact tracers more chance to get ahead of it, but also there is a chance that even if they miss one, there's a chance that the thing burns out before it gets going. So look, this is a fast, decisive response, and I think the other thing is the lessons were learned that dithering, in Victoria in terms of just slow ramp up actually leads to more drama, more deaths, and probably a much worse lockdown, which is worse for the economy.
I want to ask you about masks, because all South Australians are now being asked to wear a mask if they are outside the home. Given that the state has been virtually virus-free for such a long time, we're seeing masks flying off the shelves. How realistic is this in the interim?
Look, there has been some leeway given. I mean, the recommendation is pretty solid to try and get going with this. But look, that's kind of why the AMA has been saying that we don't feel that, that whole national framework for reopening idea about going to COVID normal, which is basically everybody just doesn't have any restrictions, and that we don't have any, we get complacent and we're not ready on a war footing for this, leaves us open. And to some degree, SA has been an example of that. And because we haven't had the cases, and it's understandable that people weren't ready, and all the masks are in Victoria, so we need them over here, and everybody needs to saddle up, and it's just taking us a few days to get going with that.
Doctor, is it becoming more apparent that a number of states and territories, South Australia being a prime example, are pursuing more of an eradication strategy as opposed to a suppression strategy? And will that work in the long term? And at what point do we say we need to learn to live with the virus and with the outbreaks?
Yeah, I've heard this. Look, and it's become politicised, which is extremely silly. The thing is that everybody's been online about this thing called aggressive suppression, which is basically what you don't want to see is community spread popping out from nowhere. And the problem with this infection, because of characteristics, is the high risk of uncontrolled community spread, and that's why the call's been made to go hard. So no, this is the decision across the board has been this aggressive suppression, basically meaning we don't get this community spread, which is kind of across the board. Now, the thing is that a lot of people are going, oh, well, why don't we just live with it? Well, with this one here, it may not be possible to do that. It could just go rampant very quickly. And that's why there's been a level of decisiveness to try and make the call. And, look, we're all looking towards a vaccine at some stage, and hopefully next year we can get one. But look, we want to get as many of us through as possible unscathed. And this is why it's even more of a good decision to try and get on top of it and not dither like places like the UK have done. And every time they've done that, they've actually led to worse troubles later.
Quarantine staff will now be tested weekly across the country for COVID-19. Are you surprised, Doctor, that this wasn't introduced months ago, particularly given that the original outbreak in Victoria, that came from hotel quarantine? Is it surprising that it's taken so long for this to be implemented?
Yeah, look, with retrospect, I think that there probably is an element of that probably should have been done. Interestingly, it may not have made a huge lot of difference with this one. This one was probably more luck anyway, because of the rapid generation spread in terms of going from one to the next one to the next one. The 7 days in itself is may not have necessarily caught it, depending on when that original test happened. Look, but nevertheless, I think every sort of we need to look at everything with a microscope and see whether we can do better, and that's one of them. And also things like, whether, we can support people so they don't have to work several jobs if they're working in hotel quarantine. Those sort of things need to be looked at to just increase best practice and learn these lessons, because this hotel quarantine is clearly our biggest danger. And while we really want to bring everybody back from overseas, we also risk the rest of the community in doing so, if and even when it's done as well as possible.